You then described Mr. Meadows at 11:45 a.m. on Inauguration Day, asking the Secret Service how quickly they can get to the Justice Department because he wants to try to declassify something literally in the last 15 minutes when Donald Trump is president. What was that about? What was he trying to do?
That specific binder was pertinent to Crossfire Hurricane. Do we want to put people back in power that have mishandled and have been showed to mishandle the most sensitive national security secrets that our nation has? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves.
That was former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson telling my colleague Rachel Maddow that 15 minutes before President Biden was sworn in, Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was rushing to declassify a key intelligence about the Russia investigation. And today we have new reports detailing that the intelligence community has been searching for a missing binder of classified intelligence on that very same subject. Joining me now is former FBI Special Agent Peter Strzok, who helped launch the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Peter, I know you can't talk about what's in this binder, but I do wonder if you can give us a sense of the gravity of the secrets that are enclosed within it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've seen most, if not all, of this intelligence reporting. The first thing to realize, I think we're doing a little bit of a disservice when we call this a binder. I mean, we're talking 10 inches of material. When you go to the store to pick up some paper for your printer or ream of paper, it's about 2.5 inches tall, and that's 500 pages. 500 pages. So if you add up 4 of those, we're talking around 2,000 pages of information. This isn't a couple of documents. This isn't 24 pages. This is more than 1,000 easily. And within it, the potential loss of this was so grave that the intelligence community determined that they needed to go to the Senate Intelligence Committee and brief them on the potential loss of this information and its impact on sensitive sources and methods. And that when the Senate wanted to review it, they had to go to a special room at the CIA out at Langley in Virginia. So I can't overstate how extraordinarily sensitive some of this material is. It goes to human sources, potentially individual sources that the CIA and others have recruited overseas. And the question is, where did this go? And as a result, what does the U.S. government have to do? If there is a source in place that's been recruited, does the CIA or others have to go and exfiltrate them from wherever they happen to be living? The amount of damage that is potentially caused by this binder that just disappeared, this 10 inches of thousands of pages of material, is just devastating. And the fact that the community was briefing the Senate last year, years after Trump left the Oval Office, and nobody knows where it is just a damning indictment.
Yeah, and the reporting suggests, I mean, we given what transpired apparently down at Mar-a-Lago, we are not led to believe that Donald Trump really placed classified information high on his list of priorities in terms of keeping it safe and secure. And yet this is the way they treated this stack of information was so cavalier as to be mind-boggling. I'll just read an excerpt. The House, right? The House has to jump through hoops just to get a look at this thing. House Republicans cut a deal with the CIA in which the committee brought in a safe for its documents that was then placed inside a CIA vault, a setup that prompted some officials to characterize it as a turducken, or a safe within a safe. A turducken, for those who have not had the pleasure of eating one, is a turkey outside. It's a chicken stuffed in a duck, stuffed in a turkey. It's a multi-layer fowl feast. But that gives you a sense of the security blanketing this thing. And then the White House has random people running around Washington, D.C. with the thing stuffed in a Whole Foods grocery bag. What is the discrepancy between the way the CIA and the House are treating this information and the White House is treating this information? What does that chasm suggest to you about the fact, about whether we're ever going to find this thing again?
Well, I'm curious if we ever will find it. The fact that the intelligence community has been looking for it sounds like, for a couple of years, leads me to believe there's a strong chance we never will know what happens. But look, Alex, I think this shows just an utter lack of understanding and absolute contempt by the former administration towards the national security of the United States of America. Folks, your listeners need to understand how much time and energy and money that the U.S. intelligence community spends on a day-in, day-out basis to try and recruit sources of information, develop sources of information in places that are really hard to do that, like in Russia, like in China, like in Cuba, like in Iran. And to so cavalierly treat this information, I think Cassidy Hutchinson said that Mark Meadows at some point yelled at her saying, "Why is that in the safe? Why don't you just keep it in your desk?" And she responded, "Mark, this belongs in a SCIF." That sort of behavior is absolutely problematic. And Alex, the last thing, it's not just problematic because of the past damage it might have caused. Every single one of our allies, every single nation around the world is watching this as well. And they're trying to determine if Donald Trump is reelected to the United States, what, if anything, are they going to choose to share with the United States? So this is damaging the national security to the U.S., not just in the past, but going forward for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. I do wonder what the sort of potential penalty is for anyone involved in the disappearance of this binder, because the last person seen with it is Mark Meadows. And Cassidy Hutchinson offered some, I would say, cold comfort. This is quoting from her book. I believe this is quoting from her testimony to the January 6th committee. "I just know Mr. Meadows. He wouldn't have had it copied unless he did it on its own," speaking of the information. "But I don't think he knows how to use a copy machine." The fact that Mark Meadows doesn't know how to use a Xerox machine, I suppose, is some comfort that maybe this hasn't been distributed widely, but not enough for I think, most onlookers to this saga. What would be the penalty for anybody involved in this? I mean, given the gravity of the sort of breach, if you will?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstances. I mean, part of the issue now is, some folks are asking, well, why hasn't Mark Meadows' house been searched? To get to the point of establishing probable cause, to get a search warrant, the government has to demonstrate a probable cause that there's information currently at the place to be searched. So in this case, they would need something. It's not enough to say, well, Cassidy Hutchinson saw what she thought was the binder leaving with Mark Meadows. There would have to be somebody saying, I was in his house last week and I saw this big binder and he showed me this classified document. So it is a high hurdle to get to the point of being able to obtain a search warrant. But then certainly if somebody still had this information, you'd have to go through, what did they know about what the material was in terms of its classification? Did they believe it had been declassified by Donald Trump? There are a lot of elements of the crime that would need to be established. But certainly if this was done with bad intent, I mean, these are the types of things, if it led to the loss of a human agent's life, the espionage statute goes up to the death penalty. So again, that's an extreme case where somebody, knowingly working for a foreign power and gave up this information. But the fact of the matter is, regardless of whether or not a law was broken, the U.S. intelligence community has to assume that this material was compromised. And everything they do with sensitive sources and methods, technical techniques, human sources, they have to treat all of that as if it's been compromised and adjust their operations. So it is not a stretch to say that potentially millions of dollars of damage have been done simply by the loss of this binder.
And important human intelligence sources potentially compromised. Peter Strzok, thank you for putting it all into perspective for us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.